Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. This is part 3 of chapter 4, Zip It and Pray. And the quote is from John Bunyan: "Prayer will make a man cease from sin, or sin will entice a man to cease from prayer." So now we're learning from Daniel. Now, what in the world does the story of Daniel and his friends have to do with us? Some of us may relocate to a strange new country with unfamiliar customs and foods, but I doubt any of us will be tossed into a roaring fire or face a roaring lion. Does Daniel's saga hold any life lessons for us? At least 3 that I spy. 1. Surround yourself with like-minded friends. Although Joseph remained faithful to God in a foreign culture, most of us, Daniel included, need a little help from our friends. Standing in solidarity, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego agreed together to stay faithful to God's law by foregoing the unclean foods. We teach our children to choose their friends wisely and not give in to peer pressure to do something wrong. But then so often we forget to heed our own advice. The Apostle Paul warns us of this. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. However, the converse is also true. Being around those who share our faith and conviction can strengthen and encourage us to choose wisely and avoid sin. The author of Hebrews writes, "See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. But encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness." My son's Russian friend David told me a saying about this from his culture. "Show me who your friends are, and I will show you who you are." If we fail to be intentional in choosing friends who make godly choices, and instead surround ourselves with those who make poor or even ungodly ones, those friends and their poor choices can rub off on us. If we aren't firm in our convictions, we might buckle, becoming like them. This includes how a person uses their words. I once knew a woman who regularly spoke ill of her spouse. She never seemed to have anything positive to say about his behavior or his personality. My husband and I both knew this guy well, and we thought he was wonderful. He was soft-spoken and kind, generous and loyal. The negative word-wielding woman and I had a mutual friend. This friend told me she'd stopped spending time with Miss Hubby Basher because whenever she did, she found she was more likely to complain about her own husband too. The constant criticizing she experienced seemed to give her permission to rattle off her own list of complaints about her man. She finally distanced herself from this combative lady and started spending time with other wives, ones who were not card-carrying members of the Husband Haters Club. Number 2, watch your intake. Even though Daniel and his friends found themselves in a culture that not only saw nothing wrong with eating food from the king's table, but considered it an honor, they did not give in to the Babylonians' pagan practices. Because they were obedient and didn't defile themselves with unclean food, the fruit of their lives was evident. God blessed them with wisdom and understanding, far exceeding that of anyone else. It's a principle I learned in the early days of computers when I was just in high school. Garbage in, garbage out. In other words, poor input leads to poor outputs. The same principle applies to our struggle with words. If we feed our minds a steady diet of cultural garbage, entertainment, or social media that compromises biblical values, we can be sure that inputs will leak out in what we say. That is not to say we should avoid all media, but we must be aware how what we input influences what we output. For example, while I am pretty particular and somewhat restrictive when it comes to the movies I watch, very rarely I'll view one that includes some foul language. I absolutely hate that a movie with a wonderful lesson might also include some profanity. But do you know what I hate more? The fact that although I am not a cussing Christian, sometimes these bad words continue to pop into my brain for a few days after I see that film. For some people like me, hearing vulgar speech or negative conversations predisposes us to speak that way ourselves. I know this isn't the case for everyone. My husband hears a steady stream of foul language at the factory where he works. This doesn't seem to affect him the same way it would me. Perhaps God dishes out an extra measure of grace to people who must endure such situations. Maybe we should take a clue from Daniel and commit to obedience to God first, watching our intake and refusing those things that represent garbage in our lives. Sometimes bad speech slithers steadily into our vocabulary, even if the speech is only in our heads. Without realizing it, we pick up the language we are exposed to. I live in the Midwest, but when I visit North Carolina a few times a year, I pick up a cultural catchphrase. I start to say y'all. Here in Michigan, we don't usually say y'all when talking to someone, or say all y'all when talking to a group, which I'm told is the plural of y'all. We Michiganders say you guys, which incessantly annoys my sweet tea sipping southern friends. They'll say, you guys? What? We're all women here. There isn't a guy in the bunch. Yes, when I head south and hang around these ladies, I begin to pick up their lingo. Are you listening to a symphony of sarcasm as you watch a sitcom? Are you experiencing steamy scenarios on the pages of that novel now sitting on your nightstand? You might want to rethink exposing yourself to such pastimes, or they could become part of your thought patterns and maybe even your actions and speech. Number 3. Make prayer a daily priority. Did you notice that when Daniel's enemies tried to trap him, he was already known as a man who made prayer a daily priority? 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. He didn't suddenly start praying to God because he was in a sticky situation. He continued his habit of praying to God. He spoke to God constantly, and as a result, he didn't fumble or stumble over his words when asked to do something that violated his faith. He simply spoke the truth and allowed God to deal with the consequences. And Daniel's buddies did the same. When commanded to bow their knee to the gold statue, they refused. Their allegiance, both in word and in actions, was first to God. When the person we talk to most is our Heavenly Father, we naturally become more concerned with what He thinks of our words and actions than with what others think of them. When conversation with God is at the top of our priority list, we will have a better chance of speaking the truth when asked to do something that compromises biblical values. Chances are, our fiery furnace or lion's den equivalent isn't a physical one, but a social one. We may be tempted to join in on an ungodly conversation with a group of friends. If we opt out, if we do not participate in the climate of criticism and negativity, we may be tossed aside and feel the fire of rejection from others. However, I have found that when my relationship with God is solid and I make prayer a daily priority, I care much more about pleasing Him than pleasing others. Are you someone who never struggles to make prayer time a priority? Me either. But I have acquired a few trusted tips and spiritual strategies that, when implemented, can enable us to be a little more warrior and a lot less wimp. And we'll get into those strategies in the next video. So I hope you've all had a very wonderful day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!